Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Special Education Legal Fund's second webinar of 2024. My name is Christine Lai, and I am the Executive Director and Co-Founder of Special Education Legal Fund. First, before we go anywhere, we'd like to highlight our featured sponsor of tonight's webinar, Chapel Haven Schleifer Center. This award-winning nonprofit organization is based in the Westville section of New Haven, Connecticut, and it teaches adults with developmental and social disabilities to live independent and productive lives through a nationally accredited transitional living program and approved private special education school. Chapel Haven's mission is to empower adults to live independent and self-determined lives. Chapel Haven currently serves more than 250 adults in the residence and in the community with two distinct programs, REACH and ASAT, the Asperger's Syndrome Adult Transition Program. And among the profiles of the adults served at CHAC are autism, intellectual disability, Down syndrome, high-functioning autism, and more. We are so pleased to welcome Chapel Haven, to have a representative of Chapel Haven on the webinar tonight, and for their support and partnership over the years. So thank you, Chapel Haven. Also like to extend a deep thanks and appreciation to the rest of our corporate sponsors, without whom so much of what we do would not be possible. In addition to Chapel Haven at the silver level, we have American School for the Deaf, Eagle Hill, Fusion Academy, and Villa Maria. At the platinum level, we have WealthSpire Advisors. At the gold level, we have Winston Preparatory School. And at the bronze, we are represented with Shrub Oak International School, the Pinnacle School, and Spire School. Thank you to all of our corporate sponsors. For those of you who aren't familiar with Special Education Legal Fund, I'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since then, we've provided over $800,000 in grants for legal support and advocacy support to hundreds of families across 70 school districts in Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. We do this primarily through two grants programs, the Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program. The Legal Assistance Program is for attorneys and provides families in need with a $6,000 grant. The Advocacy Support Program is an advocate program, and it provides families with $1,000 in advocacy support. And for more information about either of these two grant programs, or to begin the application process, please visit our website, which is www.spedlegalfund.org. I will put that in the chat later on in the presentation. You can also scan this helpful QR code to go directly to the website. The application process has four parts. The pre-screen, which is completed on the website. Once you've finished that, you will get an application link through email. After you've completed your application, you'll be contacted for an interview, which you'll complete. And after that point, we notify families at the end of the month in which they apply. So the deadlines are the 15th of the month for the application and the 22nd of the month for the interviews. Next webinar that's upcoming is our March webinar on anxiety and mental health. We are really, really excited to bring this topic back, to the webinar series. It is a very popular one for us, and even more excited to bring back special education attorney Dana Johnson from Dana Johnson Law, as well as Dr. Tammy Moscrip from the Spire School and Dr. Adrian Smaller from Yale Child Study, all favorites of mine, and really excited to have them discuss, all the things that are going on with anxiety, mental health, depression, school refusal. We're going to touch on all those things. So that is March 27th, same time, and you would register using this handy QR code or the same way that you registered for this webinar. And that brings us to tonight. I'm so thrilled to welcome Melissa Gagne back to our webinar. This is Melissa's third webinar that you've done for us. And I just really love having Melissa, to share her perspective, because she really is the complete package. Melissa is a warrior mom who has been advocating for her son, Ryan, who has profound autism for many, many, many years, and was inspired by her experience with Ryan and with her experience with her special education attorney, Andy Feinstein, another friend of ours, to go back to law school herself and become a special education attorney and to be Andy for other families. So I just love that. I just got chills telling that story. But I'm so thrilled to have Melissa back on the webinar series, and also thrilled about all the great work that she does and continues to do on behalf of families. So welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Of
so happy
course.
to be here.
Our next panelist is Julie Swanson. And Julie is another, just person whose life story really astounds me. Julie is also the parent of a young man with autism, and it was also her experience with in the education system that inspired her to become a special education advocate. She's also the author of a book with attorney Jen Laviano, Melissa's partner, called what is it called?
Your
What's the
special education rights, what your school district isn't telling you.
Thank you. And you're working on the second book. So
Yeah.
we're just
Yeah.
thrilled to have you back. This is like your fourth webinar for us, or fifth.
Yeah.
I think you get a jacket when it's your fifth time. I don't know.
I'll
We're
be looking
thrilled.
for
And
that
you've
in
got to
advance.
follow Julie and Melissa on Instagram, TikTok, because they're always full of great little tips for parents of children with autism. So love that.
Right. And not to interject, but you may
Yeah.
want to check me out on Facebook right now, because my Instagram was hacked and what's on there right now is not terribly pretty.
Oh no.
Might be a little X-rated. So we're just,
Okay, well, we'll table the social media for now. Table that for now.
I'm working on it.
Next, I am thrilled to welcome Kathryn Crosby. We just have a great time on these things. I'm telling you. It's so thrilled to welcome Kathryn Crosby from the Pinnacle School in Stamford. This is your first webinar for us, and Kathryn brings a wealth of knowledge from her work as a clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience working with students to optimize their mental health. And she comes to us from Pinnacle, as I said, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited. And I understand that Charlie Manos, the executive director and head of school at the Pinnacle School, was not able to join us, as some may have hoped, but I hope to be able to fill his shoes as best I can. And it's really a pleasure to be on this panel with such amazing experts in your respective fields. So thank you for joining. Thank you
Thanks,
for welcoming
Kathryn.
me.
And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Gina Apicella to the Self Webinar series. Gina comes to us from Chapel Haven, where she is a BCBA, a board certified behavioral analyst, and she has extensive experience working with adults on the spectrum, including her work as part of ASAT, the Asperger Syndrome Adult Transition Program, which I referenced earlier at Chapel Haven. And we're really, really thrilled to have Gina join us tonight. Welcome,
Thank
Gina.
you. Thank you.
And finally, well, not finally, but because it's a webinar, here is our disclaimer. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal advice, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by a special education legal fund or any of its representatives, of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on the panel. So here we go. Supporting students with autism at school. So this is I'm really, very, very thrilled to have this, to bring this topic up, because I feel like, I'm the mother of a 19-year-old on the autism spectrum. And many times I feel like people don't want to label their kids with autism or anything else, but particularly autism. And I go back to an experience when my son was really young, and we were visiting the dentist, his pediatric dentist, and I had gone to this person, and he had seen her a number of times, and I had kind of danced around the term, without using it. I was like, he has sensory processing, he doesn't like loud noises, this and that and the other thing. And I went back and forth, and every time it was a miserable experience at the dentist. It was screaming. It would end in, just a horrific time. And then one day after he was diagnosed, I shared with her, I said, he has autism. He was diagnosed with autism. And it was literally like a light switch went off. And for years after that, I was like, why did I need to say that word for that to happen? I felt like I had given that information before that, but it was literally, it was like a light switch going on, off, or on, off, or whatever for her. And so what I'd like to do to start is if each of you could list 3 things that flip the switch for you when someone shares that you're dealing with a student with autism. Who wants to go first? Kathryn, you're nodding, so it feels like you want to go.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Why not? And I really appreciate your personal perspective. And so at the Pinnacle School, this is my 5th year, and I work in the high school. I'm the high school counselor, so I work with students, roughly between 13 and 18. And I really find that, at that age, students have a very, for the most part, they want autonomy, they want to be independent, and they want to understand themselves. So I think for young people to have an understanding of whatever their diagnoses may be, whatever, doctors or clinicians have learned about them that might be helpful for their teachers, for other providers to know about them. I think that's really important information for them to feel empowered. Like, hey, these are my diagnoses, or hey, this is what, the psychoeducational report said. And perhaps, I'm a whole person, right? I'm not just labels. So they can inform providers, clinicians, in your great example, perhaps a dental provider, and maybe give that person some information like, oh, okay, this is helpful. Again, it doesn't tell the whole story of who that person is, but at least it might switch those, flip the switch, as you said.
Flip the
The
switch.
light switch, exactly. Turn some things on. So again, just collaborating with any of the adult providers, especially at school, helping a young person to feel that he or she has an understanding of what diagnoses may have been given to that young person. Again, not as labels, but just as an understanding for the community to know, like, okay, that usually means XYZ. And hopefully for the young person to also say, with this information, this is how I hope you'll see me. Like, this is information that I hope can inform who I am, but, get to know me as an individual, because these are just kind of umbrella labels, and they certainly don't tell the full story.
Perfect. Thank you. Who wants to go
Thanks.
next? Julie?
Well, I need you to repeat the question, because is it flipping the switch for me or for the other person?
Flipping the switch for a provider, for someone that's supporting a student.
Okay, let the other 2 go first, because now
Okay.
I've got.
All right. Sorry.
I need.
I'll
to-
go. I can
Melissa
go.
seems like she wants to go.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think something that I hear a lot from prospective clients in particular. So these are parents who, something's gone wrong because they're calling an attorney. So whether it's the trust has been broken, something's gone wrong. Perhaps their child isn't even diagnosed yet. But oftentimes I hear when I always ask them to bring their child to life for me. So
Mhm.
bring your child to life. We take some basic information, but I always want the parents to bring their child to life for me. All the wonderful experiences they're having, all the struggles they're having, to tell the whole picture. And oftentimes I hear, she's so inflexible. She's so rigid. Anytime we change a routine, anytime we say we're going to the park, but we have to stop at the store before we go to the park, she melts down. And, anecdotes around rigid thinking. It's either yes or it's no, or it's black or it's white. And the inability to stray from the concrete and maybe go into the abstract. So they tell, when they bring their child to life, they tell many stories that promote this idea of sort of inflexible, rigid thinking, struggling with transitions. And when I hear that, a light switch goes off and I start to ask perhaps some other questions. Has there ever been an autism diagnosis? Sometimes there's a medical diagnosis at that point, a clinical diagnosis, but there hasn't been the school hasn't evaluated for autism. But that's sort of the, I believe one of the traits that I think parents will talk about, but like you, Christine, they don't necessarily associate it with autism. But that rigidity, it has sort of roots in so many things. It's routines and people, new people and new places, and straying from a routine. If my son, who's 27 now, he has profound autism and an intellectual disability, and he was diagnosed very, very young. He to this day loves Barney. To this day, he loves, I've had 27 years of Barney. I feel like I deserve some sort of special award for that.
You do, definitely.
But he only likes Barney, the original voice. So if he hears, because there have been several iterations of Barney.
There was more than one Barney voice?
Oh, there is.
Oh,
and
dear.
if you put the voice on, that's not the original voice.
Uh-huh.
It's very upset.
Yeah.
So that's the example on an extreme, maybe in the profound realm of autism, right? But in a different realm, it could be something as a student who is in a science class, and that's his favorite class because of his teacher, and that's his favorite teacher, and his favorite teacher shows up to that class and there's a sub. And that can completely dysregulate a student with autism the rest of the day.
Right.
So those are just some anecdotal examples of that.
Or dinosaur chicken nuggets instead of regular chicken nuggets, or the other way around,
Exactly.
etc.
Since the question confused me and I know the answer I'm going to give right now, I'm going to go next if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
I think, piggybacking on what Melissa said, many parents come to me and they either know that their child has autism, right? But they don't want anybody else to know, and they don't want to have it known, and they don't want to even test for it, right? Or they do know, but they still don't want to acknowledge it, right? And so what I like to do is not only help flip the switch for the parent, and for the providers, the people who are working at school, is to talk about the pros of, let's find out what the diagnosis is.
Right.
Let's call it what it is.
Right.
Because when people know what it is, including you, and I would hope that you and your child can eventually get to a place where that does not bring shame to you. That is not something that you need to be embarrassed about. And that can be a journey that can take a length of time, depending, right? I know, and that's a unique journey to all people, and it should never be criticized. It is what it is. But eventually we all need to accept what our strengths
The whole
and weaknesses.
package. Yeah.
Right. So we can advocate for ourselves. So I try to convince parents, let's find out what it is. And then when we find out what it is, letting the team know what it is. Now it's just not the bratty little kid who doesn't want to listen to someone.
Right.
If there have been behavioral issues. Now they say, oh, we understand this now. So
the switch is flipped.
Yes. Yes. So it's sometimes I have to first help flip that switch for parents who, for whatever reason, are fighting that label, right? Which, and then of course, once we do get that diagnosis, having that be a relief to all the people who are going to be working with the child so they know what they're dealing with.
Someone in the participant in the webinar wrote in the chat, if you name it, you tame it. And that, I think, is really, profound and true, not just for yourself, as a parent or for the provider, but for the child, for the student, it's really
Absolutely.
important, to be able to wrap your arms around the person that you are. And that's
Right.
how and that's part of it. Gina?
Oop, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I think one of the things I was going to say is similar and related to what you just said. We at Chapel Haven work with adults. So, as potential students come to us and, we're starting to get to know individuals, we sometimes have, a parent who will say, we don't really talk about any diagnoses. We don't talk, we don't say autism, we don't say, whatever it is. And we of course, come from, a place of understanding,
Sure.
the intentions behind that. But at the same time, we do try to encourage, the awareness, and just wanting our individuals that we work with to know as much as possible about themselves and as many things about, how they can advocate for themselves. And many of our students take college classes and are, most likely going to need some sort of accommodations. And needing to know yourself in order to know what you're asking for and what you need. So that's related to what you were just talking about. I think also motivation is something that we sometimes we'll hear all the things that somebody in one of our potential students or a student that we're working with likes and enjoys, but then there's not a lot of follow through. And I think we of course support our students with executive functioning and, how to make it out the door for something enjoyable or how to prepare yourself to follow through with something. But then if there's not follow through, after having a lot of support put in place or different, different strategies put in place, then we're really questioning, are we just, yesing us so that, because it's easier to just agree rather than, actually follow through with something and, not again, advocate for yourself. Or, is there something else that's getting in the way? So a lot of our individuals are just, they're getting to know themselves, they're young adults, and the same way any 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old is just
coming
getting to
into
know
their own,
themselves.
for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes we sit back in awe that, most of us at 18, 19, 20 years old didn't live in an apartment on our own and take care of our own life skills, tasks in our homes. And many of our students are doing that at that
Yeah.
age. That's what we're working with them to learn how to do. So sometimes we do have to take a step back too and really, give credit where credit is due, that, they're doing things that a lot of us are not even doing at their
Not even
age.
doing.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
This is a sort of a follow on this whole idea, but how important is the the classification autism on on an IEP, for example. I get a lot of you know I see a lot of parents who are either very adamant that the classification be autism on the IEP, and and then just as many that want to move it to something else. What is your sort of feeling on that?
Well, okay, I'll go first. I think that there's two lenses that you have to look at that from, right? If you've got a young person who is higher on the spectrum and is aware of themselves and perhaps not yet at a place where they can accept that or the family can accept it, I understand how there could be some resistance to that. That in and of itself is a journey and will come hopefully in time. But I feel strongly that, you'll always hear, well, it doesn't matter what the label is because we're still going to get them the same services. But I believe if we know what it is, let's call it what it is,
Right.
because then that helps people understand all of the different issues that go on with that diagnosis.
Yeah.
That's my simple answer to that. And which does, and yet, if there is a family who is not there yet, I do try to be as respectful as I possibly can
Sure.
be about that, because I understand that journey myself, and
Mhm.
I've been.
Melissa, you want to take that next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I agree with, you know, what Julie is saying, and you do hear, I hear it. I know we have people at the webinar across the country. So in Connecticut, we're the only state that calls our IEP meetings, PPT meetings, planning and placement team
Thank
meetings.
you.
So when I say PPT, I mean an
IEP.
IEP meeting.
Right.
And I hear over and over again, it's, you know, it's not the class, the classification doesn't really matter. It's the support and services will be in place regardless. But, you know, I feel that when you're talking about autism, that so much of the reason that there is an educational impact to the extent that the student requires specialized instruction, special education services, it's all related to the autism. And so, like Julie said, let's call it what it is. You know, now that
Yeah.
I love that. Let's name, you know, you have to name it to tame it. So this is what it is. And, you know, the services that, you know, come under the umbrella of autism are vast. It just depends on the individual needs of that particular student. But I do come across families that have a preconceived idea of what autism services will look like.
Mhm.
So many times, and that's not exclusive to just autism. I think a lot of times clients who are, you know, are sort of in their part of the journey where acceptance is maybe hasn't happened yet.
Mhm.
And part of the reason I think is because they envision special education looking like it did when they were
When we
kids.
were, when we were kids, yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so that makes it harder for them to
Right.
move out of, you know, into that acceptance phase. But I believe that if you know, if the child requires the support and there is an educational impact related to autism, that absolutely they should be classified on their IEP as a student with autism.
Mhm.
And, you know, for so many reasons, one of them being also, if that child moves to anywhere, to another district, to another state, you want to make sure that the classification that you're finding a child eligible for special education services can follow that child anywhere, and that team can pick it up and really understand,
Mhm.
you know, how to best support that student.
And, you know, I really don't hear that argument being made much over any other disability classification.
Yeah.
And I think that's because sometimes with autism, depending on the severity of the autism, that could come with some heftier resources, right?
Mhm.
That can sometimes follow it, whether that's a board certified behavior analyst or paraprofessionals or consultants or whatever. But I'm just adding that as an aside. I really don't hear that argument being made over, well, let's not call it a learning we don't
Right.
really
Let's
have
not call it dyslexia, you know, or
Yeah.
whatever, you
Right.
know.
or
Yeah.
learning disability. Well,
Yeah.
you know, so anyway, but go ahead.
Gina, would you like to answer? Share?
You know, I have to say, you know, most of our students, so we do have some students coming in on their school district IEP for their transition program.
Yep.
So typically, you know, everything is already put in place by the time everybody gets to
Gets to
us.
us. Yes, you do, yeah.
Yeah. So I can't say that I have a ton of experience and knowledge with that younger group. I think we have had some individuals who have had a later diagnosis. So there's been, and we found that oftentimes, you know, as many of us have probably seen in articles and journals, it tends to be our females who are oftentimes for us diagnosed a little later. And you know, I think that definitely impacts, you know, the services, the transition planning that's happening, you know, in high school. And I think, you know, the sooner all of that starts, the better, because we do see districts that are, you know, kind of scrambling because they are looking at once they get to us, they're looking for an appropriate outplacement. And it's a pretty lengthy process. So you know, our perspective on it is maybe a little bit on the other end of the educational experience.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add as well, certainly kind of sharing the perspective of a school that serves students grades 2 through 12. I think when we are working with students who have a diagnosis on their IEP, we as a community, as I said earlier, like you mark that's information, doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. You want to use the accommodations that are in place. But often in my experience, when at PPT, and we work with a variety of school districts, even though we're based in Stamford, our school serves students from a wide swath of Southern Connecticut. Generally, the family and the district, and of course the advocates, want the most amount of services potentially needed to support that student. So you don't necessarily, um, it doesn't mean that student will utilize those services as that student gets older or transitions into other programs, but you at least want to have that as an option.
Mhm.
So I agree with what others have said that, it usually benefits the student to have the information explicitly on the IEP. It usually allows for additional accommodations that might not otherwise be allowed. And not that student needs to use all the services available, but why not have it again as that student transitions or moves to Melissa's point, moves to another state.
Perfect.
If I could just add one more
Yeah.
thing, especially for younger families, if it's not autism and they're not, and it's not, you're not calling it what it is, when you have that medical diagnosis, that also opens up the ability to potentially get home services through your insurance, unlike some other disability classifications.
Mhm. Oh,
And
great point.
when you get, if it doesn't say autism, it could actually, put that decision off for years.
Mhm.
If the team sort of isn't going in that direction,
Mhm.
it might be less likely for a parent to find that out eventually.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you. Um, this question is for Kathryn and for Gina. Obviously, Julie and Melissa, feel free to chime in. I mentioned sensory challenges, earlier, as something that, at least for me is something that says, autism, to me. How do you support students with autism in the school setting who have that kind of, those kinds of issues, with sensory challenges? What strategies do you follow? How do you change the environment? What do you do to support kids that have, sensory issues?
Great. I'm happy to share what we do at the Pinnacle School. And like I said, I work in the high school, but I'm going to kind of speak broadly because I think it also applies to the lower school and the middle school divisions. So our model is very individualized.
Mhm.
We have almost as many staff as we do students. So we are privileged to be able to kind of create, and accommodate wherever students are, whatever they need in the moment. So to answer your question, we also have occupational therapists, we have speech language pathologists, we have mental health clinicians, and we, in addition to teachers, we have behaviorists, we have social emotional coaches. So if a student kind of comes to us with the kind of explicit understanding that student has sensory needs, before the student even enters the school, we will probably develop a plan to support that student. And that might look like, um, the setting is very plain. It's very, it's lovely, but, not a
Right.
lot
Not a
of
lot of, things on the wall.
colors
Yeah,
and
yeah.
exactly. And our classrooms tend to, we have, I'd say maximum, and this is in the high school, maybe 5 students. Our average is more close to 4. So, smaller classrooms, students are always allowed and really encouraged to take breaks. They generally walk, they often, our students will have headphones. We can provide headphones if that's helpful to them. All
Mhm.
the classrooms have sensory tactile fidgets that they're provided with. We also have an OT gym in the building, which is generally more for the younger students, but the upper school students have access if they need breaks to move. A lot of students like to go outside to take walks. I'm probably forgetting a lot of other things, but it's really kind of with the understanding that this is part of who they are. And students, by the upper school, they tend, as I said, to kind of advocate for themselves a little bit better, or maybe they've come to the school having had, other experiences where they understand what works best for them. And, so they can say like, this is, this is too loud for me, or can I take a break? Or, our teachers are trained. Which students have sensory perception, challenges, and might say, oh, I'm noticing a student's hands are getting clenched. That, I know that means this student would benefit from a break. I'm going to encourage that student to leave the classroom, with adult support, for instance. So that's kind of how we work with it on a general basis in our school.
Perfect. Gina?
Yeah, and I would say, truthfully, a lot of the same things are what we're doing at Chapel Haven as well. Our program is also very individualized. We are trying to work with each individual to determine, what can help them in the moment. At Chapel Haven, in classes, even in their apartments or the grocery store. If it's something that might be needed, to an accommodation that might be needed, out in the community. But then we are trying to figure out too, how can we make this as functional as possible so that the sensory needs are being met. But there's also the ability to, take that solution elsewhere to
generalize the solution.
Right, exactly.
Offered for them.
To a college class, oftentimes I would say we do see, some of the same, taking walks is like a really nice, like, de-stressor, for our individuals in the moment. So we also encourage breaks when needed. The lighting, the furniture, all the things, we just try to minimize the possibility that those things are going to be issues. But at the same time, we are trying to teach that, if an individual is somewhere where there is a chair that's uncomfortable, how can we accommodate that? Like, how can that individual find a solution that,
how can we solve this in the moment?
Right. And hope that would be functional and allow them to continue to participate, hopefully. So many of the same things. And we are trying to always keep generalization in mind and thinking of the big picture of, what is this going to look like at work or in college, long term.
Yeah.
Christine,
yeah, go ahead.
Just in terms of parents who are here maybe advocating for their kids at their schools, something to think about is when I was, I don't know if you mentioned this in the opening, but before I went to law school, I was in education for 20 years. So one of my roles was I was a school principal. And in many of our schools in our district, we had little sensory gyms. And again, primarily for some younger kids. So there were squeeze machines and weighted vests and ball pits and brushes, the brushing protocol. So some very tangible hands-on sensory. And when I say sensory gym, it was a room, a little room. It's not fancy. So if you have a child that has sensory needs that maybe can't advocate, isn't at the place where they can advocate for what they need. They may not be able to say, I want to take a walk. Maybe a sensory need is manifesting in a behavior, but truly it's just a sensory overload. Parents can request these sensory gyms for their school. Again, it doesn't have to be this big fancy room. They can request the vest. They can request
the beanbag,
the machine. Things that can, so, the first step to that would be if you don't have an occupational therapist involved on your child's PPT, you've never done a screen or an evaluation, that would be a good first step. But sometimes you come up against, well, we don't have a sensory gym here. Well, that's not an appropriate answer from a
Mhm.
school district.
Right.
So just something to keep in mind when you're advocating for kids with, these sensory needs, that
Right.
you want to get an OT involved, and if there isn't access at your child's school, you want to make sure that they are putting together a safe space and some tangible items that could potentially be helpful for
And
your
they're helpful for
child.
everybody,
Right.
not just the child, everyone needs a sensory break, at certain times. And what I'm hearing from
Sure.
all of you is it's important to be able for children, for students of, a variety of ages to be able to kind of in the moment be able to seek that support in the environment and, not have to, go a long distance for it or, seek out someone to get it for them. They need to be able to find it in the moment. And so that's really, really helpful, helpful.
Have you heard of the Hoglet? Have you heard of the Hoglet? I have no affiliation with this company,
Okay.
but they've
I have not heard of
created
the Hoglet.
the Hoglet is the first sensory-friendly computer mouse. And
Oh.
what's happening, it was designed by parents during the pandemic for their kids with autism.
Mhm.
But what's happened is all kids love it. All kids can benefit from
Yeah.
it. And it's actually I have one in here. I'll look for it when someone else is talking, but it feels, I love it. I have one. Because I ordered one for my son, and what they're finding in classrooms is that all kids are benefiting from having that tactile
Sensation. Yeah.
we have I know that this isn't about mental health, and I know that's your next webinar, but there is a mental health crisis right now, and our kids are very anxious in schools, and it's helpful to relieve some of that anxiety for all
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
So the more of those kinds of devices you can find and integrate into your child's program, if you're a school personnel that's watching tonight, into your school program, that I think that'd be great. I'll look for my Hoglet when someone else is talking.
And a sensory gym doesn't necessarily have to be like a gym. It's like when we
What I
say
mean.
sensory gym, it doesn't mean like this whole space that's dedicated.
Right.
It can, be a few, a bean bag, some, in the corner, with,
Exactly.
that's a safe sort of area that's designated. It doesn't have to be all that, and it's just accessible to the, the child that needs it in the moment.
Right,
Julie,
and
do
that's
you
why it's
wanna
very
sorry, go
easy
ahead.
to say if you don't have a sensory gym, if the response you're getting is, I don't have a sensory gym, the way to respond to that would be, then let's create one
Right, let's
together.
make one. Exactly, exactly.
Of course, that might be in a closet because some people don't have the space in their buildings, and that's one of the big challenges. But I agree with Melissa. I mean, it could be something that's just kept in a corner that the child goes and gets and brings out into the hallway if they have to.
Mhm.
It's the
For the
sky's
time
the
that they
limit.
need it.
It's just a matter of how willing you are to think outside the box.
Absolutely, absolutely. How do you, approach advocating for a child with autism, throughout the life cycle, Julie?
Yeah.
I'll let you begin.
Yeah.
Thinking about the stages of,
Right.
kind of, birth
Right.
to 3, elementary, middle
Right.
school, high school transition. How do you
Right.
think about that, the change in that process?
Right. Well, just to, one of the things that I was on the transition task force for the state of Connecticut for like 10 years. I'm no longer on it, but I'm very transitioned to adulthood centric and
Mhm.
minded. And it's one of the reasons that I started the Life Skills Lady website that I
Yeah.
have, because we have very poor outcomes in adulthood for too many kids who have autism spectrum disorders. And while we know that we need lots of more research to figure out what are the indicators, the predictors of successful quality of life and increased independence for kids with autism in adulthood, I think everybody can agree upon that life skills, and there are 10 areas of life skills, are absolutely something that can increase independence and increase quality of life without getting into studies and, you know, this indicator says this, and it's just, there's no downside to teaching life skills, right?
Mhm.
So I want all parents of kids who have autism to know that you should start thinking about transition to adulthood in preschool
Mhm.
as early as you find out that your child has autism and they are in special education,
Mhm.
and be making sure that you are evaluating their adaptive skills, whether that's through the Vineland or the ABAS, the adaptive behavior assessment scales, or the AFLs, the assessment of functional living skills, or the ABLS, the assessment of basic language and learning skills. You should, and don't assume that your child who is higher on the spectrum has life skills that are commensurate with their intelligence,
Right.
because we want to be able to keep their intelligence and their capabilities and their academic capabilities commensurate with their life skills, because that will increase their independence and their quality of life. So that's my life skills spiel.
Love it. Love it.
So here's the hoglet,
Oh, I love it.
so
Look
this
at
is
it.
the,
It's so
Oh,
squishy.
wow.
you
Oh,
see it's
it's
soft and
great.
squishy.
Yeah.
It's so you
Yeah.
can rub your hand on it.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Nice.
I will say again, disclaimer, I have no affiliation with the company. I just saw
Duly
an ad
noted. Duly noted.
on
Disclaimer is duly noted.
Instagram and
Yeah.
ordered it. They're very reasonable. You can get them on Amazon. And just to follow up in terms of the ad, so one of the things that I look for, you know, from the beginning is communication. So, right. So we have such great advancements in diagnostics. So kids are getting diagnosed earlier
Yeah.
and earlier, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, even as early as 24 months,
Mhm.
right? So, and we know that many children with autism have delays in acquiring language,
Mhm.
receptive language, so the language they understand, expressive language, being able to express themselves, nonverbal language. And all of this is, you know, these are all precursors to communication. And so I always say communication, speech is, you know, it's just so critical at that, you know, in that emerging time, but it evolves as they travel through school and they get older, you know, speech and language, as that improves. Again, my son continues to be nonverbal even at 27, but we improved a lot of his receptive language with a lot of work over the years, so he understands a lot.
Mhm.
There's multiple ways to get at this. And as they get older, you want to make sure you're looking at functional language and
Mhm.
social language.
Mhm.
So, you know, is a child able to communicate around safety issues? Are they able to have appropriate social interactions?
Mhm.
Or is there some sort of a language disorder? So speech is something that it goes far beyond just the articulation that you
Yeah.
think of when you think of speech at, you know, with our youngest kids. As it evolves in, you know, and and it kind of goes hand in hand with what Julie said about life skills, which you know, we can't assume that someone who is maybe in the higher end of the spectrum has solid pragmatic language skills.
Mhm.
So that being able to interact socially is a struggle for so many of them. So speech, it's one of the most, if not the most important thing we can teach our kids and advocate for with our kids is how to communicate in the world.
Mhm.
Both, you know, yes, academically, but
Mhm.
in terms of safety, in terms of social interactions, in terms of discourse, for
Mhm.
those who are older and in transition programs, how do you approach a job interview? You know, those kinds of speech, language,
How do you
pragmatic.
make a doctor's appointment? You know.
How do you make a doctor's
Mhm.
appointment? Exactly. So, you know, how do you make a phone call and order a pizza?
Mhm.
those are some, anyway, those are things that I think can sometimes get lost.
Yeah.
And something that you have to start right at the beginning and track and monitor. And just because a child may have reached some goals and objectives and articulation does not mean that they should not still be receiving support in speech and language on their IEP.
Because it's about, I mean, it's almost like, you start out talking about speech, but really it's about communication and, and how communication evolves over the course of someone's life. Obviously, when you're younger, you're thinking about, the articulation piece and, are the words being, said correctly and pronounced correctly, and can we understand? But as they get older, it's, so much of the nonverbal piece comes into it that, you have to like wrap all that into the same understanding, and then there's social and there's employment and everything else. But, that's a great point.
And, to piggyback on Melissa and so many things are, like I said, there's 10 areas of life skills, right? And one of the things that I find to be one of the biggest barriers when they become adults, and you can probably see this, Gina, is is behavior. So, being able to be flexible,
Mhm.
not only flexible thinking, but just flexible in, I didn't get my way, or, oh, we're not doing that, or I failed at that, combined with emotional regulation, right? Because, we happen to live now in a very zero tolerant world, right? So in order to go on, if you're going to go on to post-secondary education training or to employment, the flexibility piece, the ability to emotionally regulate ourselves and have behavior that's not going to be harmful to self or others is
Or get us
really
fired,
important.
from our job.
Of course. And
Yeah.
so the earlier you can start that, the better. And one of the things that drives me crazy when I look at people's IEPs who have kids who have autism, and it will say, there's no behaviors, right?
Mhm.
Are there any behaviors that harm self or others, or, whatever the phrase is?
Right.
No. Then you read further down, they got behavior plans up the wazoo. They've had an FBA, a functional behavior assessment done, behavior intervention plan for eloping and hitting and all these things. And I'm going, and then there's nowhere on the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance do they mention behavior.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just like, no. So it's very important that these things are recognized
Yeah.
on the IEP, and not just, and what I mean by that is in the present levels and in the goals, and not just a behavior plan.
Mhm.
Because if a behavior
Behavior is communication.
but also,
mean,
if
it
a
just
behavior
is.
plan, I have this argument, and nicely, I have this argument with people. Well, we have the behaviors on a behavior intervention plan, but guess what? If it's not a goal, you're not held accountable to teach that child
Mhm.
the appropriate behavior. So
Right.
please make it a goal as well.
Right.
I'm gonna zip it.
That's fine. You never zip it, but that's okay.
Well, I know.
That's
I
why we
never
love
do.
you.
But these are some of the things I'm a little passionate about.
So, we talked a little bit about, actually going back to the beginning of our discussion about, well, you just mentioned flexibility, but unpredictability, change, and, rigidity, going back to Melissa's first comments. Gina and, Kathryn, can you talk about how you support students who struggle with rigidity, who struggle with, all the changes that, that happen, in life and, on a daily basis? How do you support students who struggle with those changes? Maybe Kathryn, you want to go first and talk about sort of like, 2 to 12, and then we'll talk about, older adults. And then
Sure, absolutely.
and Julie chime in whenever.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Julie's passion for life skills and Melissa's as well, because we definitely, in a school are working on that as well, and agree that you can never work on it early enough.
Mhm.
And especially in the high school, we're often,
Mhm.
saying to students, and this comes up with the rigidity, right? And it can come up in small ways and large ways. My teacher's absent. I have a new teacher. I don't want to go to class,
Mhm.
or The cafeteria has a seating arrangement. I don't want to go down to the cafeteria. I can't eat there. So really validating and appreciating the struggles that come with change, and really trying to be compassionate and, validate, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard for a lot of people, hard for a lot of adults to manage change, hard for neurotypicals to manage change. However, this is a really important life skill. This is something that you're going to have to face for the rest of your life, because life is unpredictable. So let's practice. And in our school, we kind of, it's embedded in every classroom and every interaction. Because we are small and because we have a lot of staff, there is always kind of someone on the ground, an adult kind of overhearing conversations. Social emotional coaches are really kind of the ones who are there to provide, in the moment coaching, like, interactions between two students where they might notice one student being inflexible or having a difficult interaction because the other student isn't, giving the student what they want. It's like, well, that is mine. Well, no, it's not yours. It's the school's, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine how that plays out. It's like, then the adult comes in and kind of models and says, okay, let's try to unpack this. Let's validate these feelings. These are real feelings. They're hard feelings, but let's make a plan so that we can move forward. And, that might involve, separating the student and having, maybe another interaction like with a counselor, with myself, kind of checking in on the mental health or the behaviorist. Or it can also just be, let's see how this goes. Like, we believe you can do this. We think you have the skill to do this. Let's practice it. And if you're not able to do it today, then we'll try it again tomorrow, or we'll try it again later. And really kind of that growth mindset of, these are things we need to practice on a regular, because,
And we can always come back in and try again.
Try again.
Try
Exactly.
again,
Exactly.
tomorrow's a
Try
new
again.
day. Exactly.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more comfortable you feel. And, also with that mindset of whether it's a transitional facility or college or employment, you will have to be more comfortable with this skill. So this is a great time to practice it now. That's kind of our mindset.
Mantra. Gina?
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a ton of practice that goes on. There's a ton of opportunity embedded into our curriculum as well, just with the day-to-day that, our students are oftentimes living on campus. So being that they're right there, there's a lot of things that may happen or come into play when, you're working with multiple staff in multiple settings.
You have
Whether
roommates, you have the whole, that's a really interesting thing about,
Huge.
about your program, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there's, the community is completely unpredictable. There's, that's pretty much, we're teaching our students how to take the city bus, and the bus, and wherever you're going, and if the bus is late, I mean, there's plenty of opportunities for practice. But then I think also, and this is a little more specific to our ASAP program, we also like to focus on teaching and demonstrating natural consequences. So if we're not flexible in this situation, or if we're having difficulty managing whatever is going on, and our tolerance is getting kind of low, what might happen? So these are the options. Tolerance is getting low and you're at work or you're at an internship site. These are the options. You can leave and go home. You can, take 5 minutes to yourself, when we typically would already have a plan and a strategy, put in place ahead of time that's been practiced, that others in the workplace are aware of as well, so that there's not this, well, where did this person go? They were missing for 10 minutes. We make sure that people are aware. But then, we also would say, but if you go home, then what might happen? This was the third time this happened this week. So what's the natural consequence of that? So we're also, more specifically, I think in our ASAP program, we focus on the perspective taking piece as well.
Mhm.
So what might others think, and
Right.
how can we impact their view of
Right.
me as an employee or as an individual?
And that's an important thing we didn't talk about when we were talking about communication is,
Mhm.
and speech, and, is that the ability to take someone else's perspective
Mhm.
and,
yeah.
and as opposed to just your own perspective, which
Mhm.
is what, we're, a lot of times dealing with a,
Mhm.
with a kid with, or a person with, with that diagnosis,
Mhm.
That
is,
goes back to the being rigid,
yep,
right?
yep,
Unable to see outside of your own
yep,
perspective.
yep.
Right.
Mhm.
And for those parents who may want to learn more about that, a lot of school districts will use, in addition to other curricula, um, the Michelle Garcia winner, who is
Yep.
the socialthinking.com, and
Mhm.
I've absolutely no affiliation with her, but I like to talk about that site because
Unlike Melissa, who's getting,
she's yeah.
getting fees from the mouse as we
I
speak.
wish. I wish.
No, but lots of times when I speak, when I talk to parents, and I'll talk about, socialthinking.com or Michelle Garcia winner, and they're using it in their child's program to some capacity, and they don't know about it. You could go on that site and learn so much,
And bring it
and
home and bring it into the, into the home
absolutely
environment so that the
right,
full, it's,
right,
it's
right,
a fully nuanced in
right.
every part of the child's life.
And not that this was one of your questions, but it just came to my mind. The other thing that I really want parents to know about is the very underutilized and my very favorite related service called parent training. And parent training, although poorly named, because it seems like a parent needs training on how to train their work, parent their child.
We
But
all
what
need training in how to parent our child. There's not a parent out there that couldn't use some training. Seriously.
that's true, but it could insult some
It could
parents,
have a
right?
better name. I'll
It
give you
could have a better name. But what I love about it is parent training is designed for a parent to not only understand their child's disability, but it is designed so that a parent could help support the IEP.
that. Mhm.
And so I love for parents to know that if they're working on IEP goals, you can ask the school district, what strategies are you using? What language are you using? Teach me so I can help generalize those skills and support the IEP. So there's my little plug for parent training.
Absolutely. Love that. So we're coming up on, we're just about 8 o'clock, and I want to, ask a final question of you all, which is, in your mind, what is the most crucial thing that a parent can do to support their child with autism?
I would say,
Oh, good. Someone's taking.
yeah.
It's like nobody looks like they want to answer that.
I would say, really giving your child as much independence as possible. Having them, starting to prepare their breakfast when they're able to, or, once they get to high school, and if they have the ability to use an alarm to wake up in the morning. Things that, maybe as parents, we just kind of naturally do for our children,
Yeah.
but,
'Cause we do
eventually.
it faster and better, but
Exactly, yes.
that's not the important thing,
Yes. Yeah. So really taking a step back sometimes and thinking, is this something that, my child might have the ability to do at some capacity, maybe not the whole task,
Mhm.
but, even just a small piece of it, and allowing them to do it, and possibly allowing them to fail, and that's okay. And that's
Mhm.
where, some of that learning will happen as well.
Perfect.
It's hard for me to think of one thing. I have so many, because
So many things.
part of it's because I'm a parent also, and part of it is, because I work with clients and have had students with autism. I think one thing that is critical is for parents to find a support group. I think for themselves, to reach out to other parents. I didn't have that when Ryan was younger. He's older, so the internet was just starting.
Yeah.
There wasn't
Yeah.
access to community, and
Yeah.
to Autism Speaks wasn't a thing at that
Yeah.
point. And I felt very alone and very isolated.
Mhm.
And I think it impacted my ability to parent.
Mhm.
In a lot of ways. And so I think parents need to take care of themselves to the extent that they can. I understand it's not always realistic, but to reach out and find support for them, for themselves. I also think another thing, I know you said one, but I'm going to say one more because I think it's important is, and this is coming from me as a parent, which is at some point I had to make sure that that Ryan was being provided with opportunities to enjoy the things that he did love and was good at. At some point you have to you understand that he has a lot of deficits and he's nonverbal and there's so many things you can work on with Ryan.
Yeah.
But he's also very happy watching Barney.
Yeah.
And while, right? And so you have to balance, I think,
your need to constantly be like,
right.
you know,
The need to
doing,
constantly be working on his skills, constantly
absolutely,
every second,
absolutely,
and letting him just sit and watch Barney sometimes
right.
because that feels good for him. And that
that's great advice. And I,
Good one,
you know, I
Zoe.
think that to myself, you know, all the time. My son's 19 and, you know, I'm like, just like, leave him be, you know, like he's happy. Like, don't try to fix or correct or instruct or, you know, whatever it is, you know, all the time. Like, just let him be, you know. Anyway, Julie.
Yeah.
I think somebody wrote a song about that. Yeah, but no, it is so true. And as cliche as that is, it's so true. You know, mine would be, and I love all the answers that you've given, and I'm looking forward to what Kathryn's answer is. But mine is, I always like to say that, when you're a parent of a child with autism, it's not an easy thing, right? And there's not a whole lot of luxury in it, right? If you want, you get out what you put in, right? And so as an advocate, I want parents to understand their rights and how to navigate the system as much as they possibly can, because you have these years that are finite that you can educate your child, and they matter so much. So learn as much as you possibly can about how to advocate for them, so that you don't look back and say, I wish I had known that. I might have been able to do that. And so I know that's not easy.
Yeah.
And I know not everybody goes to the level of, you become an advocate. Not all mothers
or an
become
attorney or, you know,
or an attorney like Melissa, right? But you have to know a little something.
Yeah.
So learn as much as you can.
Yeah.
So you can be the best advocate for your child as you possibly can be.
Absolutely. Kathryn?
Oh, goodness. So I have to say, as a parent of two neurotypical teenagers, I have so much respect, like beyond respect, for parents of neurodivergent children and kids with ASD. And so I know several of you on this panel are in that group, and I am just really in awe, because even in my little bubble of a work environment, it can be really challenging, right? It can be challenging to educate. It can be challenging to counsel. It can be challenging to remain solid support. And this is, of course, also with teenagers, and teenagers, right, on their own have an ability to sometimes not always, appreciate their parents or want to push back against their parents, right? That's what they're supposed to be doing. And to Gina's point, right, developing autonomy, developing independence. And so I guess, in addition to all of that, like love and, kind of compassion and patience, I guess kind of hope, just kind of knowing and instilling in your child that they're going to be okay. They're going to have a great life, and they're going to achieve lots of things. And you're their cheerleader. You're there to like always root them, but they're going to do it on their own as well.
I love that.
Perfect. I
You
love
all
that.
had great answers. They were all good answers.
That's because you all are rock stars. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening for, for this amazing panel. And our next webinar is going to be March 27th on anxiety, mental health in school. And I hope you all can join us for that one. And have a great night. Everyone be well.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.